Scott just made the point.
Jefferson used to be a lot more secure, not just. You're a Christian farmer in northern Nigeria, and you've spent your 25 or 30 years trying to make a living out of the hard, arid soil. After years of religious violence fueled by radical Islamic groups, you've been driven away from the only life you've known, even though it was never an easy one. You make your way north on foot, hitching rides when you can, cross more than 2,000 miles of the Sahel in the Sahara Desert, and into the lawlessness of Libya. From there, you're hoping to find some sort of transport across the Mediterranean to find safety and refugee status in Italy. There are thousands just like you, each jostling for space on overcrowded boats and rubber rafts. You and a group of over 100 migrants finally find your way onto one of those rafts. Now, somewhere at sea, a fight breaks out. Could be over food, over water, over a pair of shoes. You're never entirely sure. But the attackers are Muslims, and they throw you and 11 of your fellow Christians overboard to drown, just miles short of the Italian coast. Your journey is ended. I'm Steve Green. This is Trifecta. Let's bring Bill Whittle and Scott on now. Gents, the story I just told you is true, and it's happened more than once. Another 41 Christians were believed to have been drowned, thrown overboard off of another boat, also by Muslim attackers, on their way to Europe. This is the face, I believe, of religious warfare in the 21st century. It's low scale, it's small scale, but it's real. Bill, the story making the big headlines, though, was a terrible accident in which one of these refugee boats sank, killing at least 700 people. But you know what? That was an act of nature. It was a tragedy. What happened on those other boats, I'd argue, is far worse, because those were human acts of evil. Now, in our news reports, why does tragedy trump evil? Is it just the numbers?
It's not just the numbers. You know, Steve, it's virtually a weekly sport now. It's like going to watch the hydroplane races back when I was a kid on Key Biscayne. Every couple of weeks, they take 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 Christians, put them in orange jumpsuits, take them out to the seashore, and saw their heads off. That's not news either. You shoot up a bakery filled with Jews in Paris. That's not news. Where do you want to start, right? I mean, how many Christians and Jews are killed by Muslims pretty much every single day, and that's not news. What is news, though, is that the president will go to his Easter prayer breakfast and talk about the mean things that Christians do. There comes a point when you simply can't. The reality of it, just sort of the naked obviousness of it is so overwhelming that you simply don't even know if you're really fully awake today when you hear stories like this being ignored, when the president talks about, what did he refer to as those people who were murdered, those Christians that were murdered? Was it in Kenya? There's so many, it's hard to keep track. 200 citizens were killed? Really, just random citizens, Mr. President? No, it turns out Christians murdered by Muslims. And the President of the United States refuses to call this what it is, and the news media follows along. Now, the President does it because he's in sympathy with the Muslims over Christians and Jews, and I don't think anybody who has any serious question about this has not been paying attention. The news media, I think, does it for a slightly different reason. It's based on the same sort of arrogance and self-sense of unbelievable moral superiority they have, but most people in the American news media won't report these Islamic murders of Christians because they're convinced that the knuckle-draggers out in flyover country, if they fully understand what's going on, will simply go out and murder Muslim cab drivers and just drag Muslim families out of their homes in Peoria and beat them to death on the streets. Only problem with that theory is that doesn't actually happen. What does happen is Muslims kill Christians and Jews around the world with impunity, protected by their betters in places like the BBC and CBS. And the whole purpose of this, Steve, is to protect the Western people from the truth, because the truth is so antithetical to this progressive, socialist, cowardly, morally bankrupt, evil worldview, this death wish that's being pushed down on us by our moral betters and our intellectual elites. I'd love to tell you that this is a fresh piece of human history, but it's not. It's always that way. Every time a civilization goes down, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the French Empire, the British Empire, it's the elites in the top that get bored, they have a death wish, they want the end of their own society, and they have to force it upon those remainders of us knuckle-draggers whose eyes are still open and whose hearts are still beating, and it's a problem for them.
Sure is. Scott, thousands have died trying to reach Italy and other parts of Europe, some of them Christians, some of them Muslim, all trying to escape the violence of North Africa, of West Africa. And that violence is religious. It is due to radical Islamic groups. Now, given all that, what responsibility does Italy have? Does Europe have? Do we have to help these victims? Or am I asking the wrong question here?
I don't know, Steve. The only thing that is not believable about the story you told at the beginning of this episode was the fact that the Christians were thrown overboard after a fight broke out over something substantive. That's the only part I don't really believe. I don't believe that a fight broke out over water or anything else. I believe that these literal Islamists threw these Christians overboard because they were Christians, not because they were, taking an extra sip of water. Italy and Greece and other areas of the northern Mediterranean have become a catch basin for refugees at unbelievable volumes of refugees who are making their way across the Mediterranean Sea, usually in leaky boats with faulty engines, sometimes that don't make it, often that overturn, at great risk to their own lives to do anything to escape, not from Africa, but from literal Islam in many cases. But unfortunately, many of the literal Islamists come with them as well. My wife and my daughter went over and did a mission trip a couple of summers ago in Greece, and they found that there were one-bedroom studio apartments that had as many as 10 men living in them, all crowded together, sleeping on the floor in Greece, because they'll do anything to get out of that area. This is not something that avails itself to diplomacy. It's not even something that avails itself to warfare in the traditional mode. You simply can't kill enough of them to stop this. What it takes is, I think, what some who are calling for reform of the religion have said. And you need to find enough people who are willing to speak up and reject the fundamental tenets of literal Islam, the so-called truth of the Quran, the infallibility of Muhammad. This has to be rejected publicly and repeatedly by people who have influence in that part of the world.
Can I just say something here?
Yeah, Bill.
Scott, look, I agree with you 100%, but honest to God, man, what makes you or anyone else think that people would do that? Why would they? If the President of the United States, the most well-defended individual on the face of planet Earth, is not willing to do this, if the publishers with their maximum security in the skyscrapers of the heart of the Western world in New York City and the New York Times are not willing to do this, if every single member of every single command center in the United States military, the most powerful force on the face of the earth, is not willing to do this, what makes you think that some poor Muslim woman who's surrounded by these savages is going to have the courage to stand up and say what everybody else knows to be true? For those people to do what you want them to do and what I want them to do and what everybody else wants them to do so that this religion can continue on in the rest of this world requires some courage from people who have the ability to show some courage. And if the president is a coward, and the New York Times is a coward, and every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a coward, and every other person operating out of every skyscraper in America who has the means to stand up for this is a coward, why should these poor people who are surrounded by these butchers with knives be expected to stand up and make a stand? This is the part of the equation that nobody wants to talk about.
Listen, Bill, if somebody asks me what it takes to chop down a tree, I'll tell them an axe or a saw or a chainsaw. I'm not saying anybody has one.
Yeah, I remember 1989 Tiananmen Square, one man standing in front of a tank. We need about 1 million of those. All right, folks, there's a former U.S. Secretary of State running for president right now. I don't want to name any names, but you'd probably recognize her name if I did. Now, as Secretary of State, this person led the effort to wage war against Libya, creating a failed state there, which acts like a magnet for both refugees and radical Islamists. Now, the Secretary of State apparently did nothing while their former boss encouraged radicals in Iran, in Syria, in Iraq, and yes, in Africa. Now, some of the results of her tenure at state lie uneasily in watery graves at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. For PJ TV, I'm Steve Green.